In this video, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Game of Crowns, a card game recently published by AEG, released at Origins 2015, a fantasy game of diplomacy and betrayal, and I'm sure that you can see from the title, the design of the cover, the theme, the fantasy setting that clearly this is a game inspired by Lord of the Rings, the Lord of the Rings franchise. I mean, I can't think of any other possible inspiration for this, right? Game of Crowns. In this game, every player uses a deck of 10 cards, at least at the beginning of the game. Each player has a deck of 10 cards, and the decks are identical. The only thing that changes is the symbol that represents the house of each player, and the symbols are important for gameplay effects. So each player has the same kind of deck. Each player also receives a defender card, an attacker card that would be used to resolve combat. Each player has a player rate and 4 Raven tokens, which are used as a sort of currency in the game. There is a round track here, which is double-sided. You can play a game for 3 rounds or for 6 for a longer game, especially if you don't have many players. There's also a deck of, they're called the guest cards. These are different types of people that you can recruit throughout the game. They do not belong to a house specifically. Any player can recruit them from the deck or steal them from other players. How the game works? It's a very simple game. You have your deck, or hand, I should say. Actually, it's a hand of 10 cards. And in each turn, you can choose to do one or two things. You may exchange cards, or you may play a card for its effect. There are only 2 cards that can be played that way. One is coinage, and when you play it, you exchange it with a card taken randomly from the hand of another player. Pretty self-explanatory. You target the player, give them the coinage, draw a random one, and the knight, which is used to attack. So you play the card for the effect, and the effect is to attack another player, but we'll talk about that later. By far, the most common thing that you will do during your turn is not to play a card for the effect, but to exchange a card. Each turn you have one of these 2 choices, exchange or play a card. When you exchange a card, all that you do is you take a card from your hand, you place it face up on the table, and you say, this is the card that I'm offering for an exchange, and you say what it is that you want in return for that, which may or may not be true. Maybe you're saying that you want a certain card, but you have secret plans and you're trying to get another card. We'll talk about that later, why that would be profitable. In any case, I say, I have a feud here, and I would really, really like to get a knight instead in exchange for it. Other players have to take a card from their hand and put it face down in front of themselves as a possible other half of the exchange. They do not have to meet the requirements. They can put whatever card they want. Maybe they don't want to give you the card that you want, so they're gonna put down another card, hoping that you will not take their exchange. Because at the end, when all is said and done, the player that is proposing the exchange will choose one of them, and the other player will have to agree to the exchange. When an exchange is started, it has to take place between the active player and the player that is selected. But maybe you do want the card that is being offered, and in that case, maybe you will offer the card that the active player wants. Or maybe you will not offer the right one, but you'll try to sweeten the deal, but also by adding some ravens to the deal, also throwing them into the bargain. Maybe there are multiple players that do want the card that is being offered. They're both meeting the requirements, and they're making all sorts of deals and agreements, maybe also adding ravens or not. It's pretty free form here. Players can agree to whatever they want. They do not necessarily have to then respect their side of the bargain. The only thing that needs to be fulfilled is the exchange. But if you promise future friendship, that is really not abiding. So, exchange. You place a card, you propose the exchange. After everybody had put down a card and start the discussion, you may choose to accept one of the exchanges, or you may raise the stakes. You may choose another card from your hand and say, actually, this is going to be an exchange for 2 cards. And again, you may say what you want in return. Every other player is forced to put down a card, and at that point, the active player will accept one of the traits. So, therefore, an exchange can be for 1 card or 2 cards, and possibly other favors. So the exchange takes place. You, the active player, give the card or cards that you exchange to another player, get that ones back, and you put them in your hand. It is that simple. For the other action, which I didn't mention earlier, the attack action, which you perform if you decide to play a knight card from your hand as an attack. And there is a procedure here, which is explained in the player aids. When you play that card, you target a player, and then all players in the game select one of their attacker or defender card. The player that started the attack, of course, is the attacker, the target is the defender, and each player, including the attacker and the defender, select one of their 2 cards, and they put it face down in front of themselves. When everybody has made their selection, then everybody reveals the vote. You're choosing side in the War of 5 Kings, or whatever it is, the war that is happening here. You choose sides and you see if the attacker or the defender has more votes. Once you counted the votes, however, then each player has a chance of influencing the votes by adding ravens to their card, the one that they selected. And each raven that is played during that phase counts as a single vote. Suppose the defender has 2 votes, the attacker has a card and 2 ravens, so then the attacker has 3 votes. In order to win, the attacker simply needs to tie with the defender. So the player with the highest amount of votes wins the fight, but the attacker wins ties. What happens here after an attack has started, everybody has voted, everybody has had a chance of adding ravens to their card, therefore to their side of the fight. A winner and a loser of that fight is declared. The winner can get a card from the opponent. In that case, the winner selects a card from the hand of the opponent, or the winner can choose to take a card from this deck, in which case it is drawn randomly and added to the winner's hand. The loser spends whatever ravens they have used, but on the plus side, they get to bring home all of the other ravens, the ones that have been played against them. This is a little bit of a fiddly detail, is the only one really. I'm not 100% sure what that represents thematically, but it just means that if you're losing a fight, you may still gain something by grabbing a bunch of ravens, especially if people really were tough and mean against you. They spent other ravens, at least you get to bring those ravens back home. The game lasts like this for 3 rounds or more if you decide to play a longer game, but this is really the core idea. You are exchanging cards, grabbing cards from other players, spending cards, and the point is that you want to reach the end of the game with a good set of cards in your hand, because the cards will score based on several specific effects. For example, the princess, when at the end of the game you're counting points, the princess makes you gain a victory point for each knight that you have. So if you have a princess, you want to have as many knights as possible. Maybe even multiple princesses to work as a synergy with multiple knights. The trader at the end of the game will earn a victory point for you for each coinage that you have. Same as above. If you're going for this strategy, you want maybe multiple traders and certainly multiple coinage cards. The feud card is a tricky one. At the end of the game, you gain a victory point for each feud you have if you have the most feud cards. If you do not have enough, then you gain 0. The feud card I've seen sometimes is seen as a pretty useless card, as an underpowered card, but it doesn't have to be. First, you do need some cards in your hand that are not vital every moment of the game, so that if you want to refuse an exchange, then you can put it there. And the opponent says, well, but I will exchange it for 2 cards. Darn it, I don't want to ruin my coinage strategy, so I'll just get rid of another feud. And the other player says, okay, fine, I'll take the feuds. So see, the feud cards are not immediately very important. People will be tempted very often to just use them as just trash, as the cheapest bargain chips that are in the game. Just get rid of them. But of course, if players do that too often and a player starts collecting a lot of these, then actually the player may end up with a pretty mighty set of cards at the end. So there is that interesting tricky thing. They're usually not very powerful cards. They can be used almost as the neutral bargain chips, unless a player is going for the fuse strategy, in which case they can turn out to be pretty powerful. The Castellan, at the end of the game, a Castellan is worth a victory point for each Raven token that you have. So actually, if you lost a fight, you collected a lot of tokens, then a Castellan or two can be pretty neat. The guest cards work in a similar way, meaning that they will score points at the end based on the condition that the card imposes and that you're able to fulfill. For example, the artist, at the end of the game, you gain a victory point for each princess in both adjacent players' hand. So these cards very often are pretty subtle that way. At the end of the game, you gain a victory point for each card you have from a different player. Remember the icons here. The diplomat can work very well because you may have a phenomenal combo of princesses and knights or traders and coin edges, and if they are not from your original hand, then you get a lot of points because of that. The jesters work in combination with one another. The more you have, the better they are. Things like that. So there are definitely a lot of decisions and other wrinkles that can come from the strategy given by the guest cards, which are, however, kind of difficult to get because you need to win a fight to be able to gain one and put it in your hand, and maybe then somebody will take it from you with some game effects, but that is part of the game. So players continue playing, exchanging cards, and doing mean things to each other until the end of the game. And at that point, players count the victory points based on the points generated by the cards that they have in their hand at the end of the game. And the player with the highest score is the winner of the game. Game of Crowns is a game of bluffing and deduction, but it is pretty different from games like The Resistance or Werewolf, where you do not know exactly who is who. There's no secret identity here. There are secret agendas, which are the things that the players are trying to do. But all the players start with the same hand of cards, with the same resources. And then, for a while, you should be able to keep track mentally of what almost everybody has in their hand. Of course, it also depends on the size of the game. Then players will start exchanging random cards, so will start drawing cards from the deck, so you do not have perfect knowledge anymore. Which is interesting still. It is still a matter of trying to get the best guess that you can come up with of what other players have in their hands, and most importantly, what it is that they're trying to score. If you want to score well, you have to commit to one or two strategies fairly early on. You may get lucky or you may change strategy at the last minute if you get a good guest card that will allow you to score on some strange effects that you hadn't taken into account. Then you can try to rewire your strategy a little bit. But usually you need to choose early on what you want to do, single out a couple of objectives and try to go for those, because the cards really score if you manage to create synergies, if you manage to create good sets. If you have a little bit of this, a little bit of that, you're not going to be able to score much. So you need to do that, which means you need to figure out what the opponents are doing. Any exchange that you do, you will do that exchange on the assumption that you are getting more from the exchange than the opponent is. Of course, the opponent is trying to do exactly the same, making you believe that you have the better side of the deal, while the other player has the better side of the deal. One of you is wrong, though. You can't possibly have better than the other person. So it's a matter of assessing how the other player is playing, what the other player is looking for, and subtly manipulating the player into giving you the cards that you need. But if the player knows more or less what you're trying to do, then the player is less likely. If you have a lot of traders that will score with coinage, it's going to be much tougher for you to get coinage. You need to figure out ways of getting those cards without being too obvious about it, or try other manipulations, or trying some really good exchange, trade some valuable cards for some card that's particularly valuable to you. What I'm trying to say is that there are games with secret identity, for example, that have bluffing and deduction, which are pretty intuitive. One of you is the werewolf and the other ones aren't. Who is that person? And I'm trying to figure out who that is. Here, I would say that the strategy behind the bluffing and deduction seems a little less intuitive, a little more complex and sophisticated than you have in many other games of this kind. Sometimes if you play a game like The Resistance, if you read body language, that is already a big help. Here, I would say it takes a group of experienced players that really want to explore the subtleties of the design, for the design to truly express the potential that it has, because you may have a player that simply always tells you what he or she wants and then simply puts down whatever it is that the player doesn't need at that time. The game can be a little dull if you play it that way. If everybody plays it that well, that way, then the game is gonna be pretty flat in terms of the experience. The subtlety comes from trying to figure out what other players have, try to maximize your chances of getting a better deal that the opponent is getting. Even hiding your objectives and pretend to be going for another card. For example, I really want a trader, I really want a coinage, and then I'm asking for a different card, and everybody's is offering their cards. Then I say, well, you know what? I'm gonna ask for another card too, and somebody else and everybody else also puts down a second card. Then I say, oh look, okay, I'll go with that deal with the Castellan because I really want that Castellan. Well, you also put the trader there. Fine, I'll get the trader too. So you kind of have to shift your objectives with the fact that you can exchange two cards at a time. You may try to make the opponents believe that you're going for a certain strategy and you're gonna get that a card with the deal, while the other card is the one that you're really interested in. The more you're able to cloud your interests and objectives, the better you are in this game. But this is why, as I said, it's a little less intuitive. It's a little it requires a little more getting used to the subtleties of the game before the bluffing and deduction really come together in this specific design, and they really reveal all of the nuances that the design has to reveal. The cards some cards at the beginning seemed overpowered, some seemed underpowered, but ultimately my impression is that every card is very situational. No card by itself will win you the game. You need to put together powerful sets. And some cards do attract a lot of attention. That if you're a Castellan, people are often going to be careful. And the same with the Trader and the Princess. Especially if I start getting the sense that my opponent has two or three of those, then I really want to deny the cards that will work in combination with those cards to score a huge amount of points. And so I really don't have that impression that there's this problem. Maybe after playing the game for longer it will appear that some card will be overpowered, but I'm sure that the design can be tweaked in some way. You can expansions will come out. I hope, because actually this is a game that I enjoy and I want to see more roles and more possibilities. But I found it enjoyable. It would not be a game that I will play with non-gamers or even with casual gamers. I think gamers that are familiar with game culture and with other games more or less of this family would enjoy the game more. I'm afraid that casual gamers may be prone to overlook some of the subtleties and some of the fine points of the strategy of the design, and therefore the experience may seem a little dull to them. So, Game of Crowns, possibly not for every group. It's better with the right group. Of course, every game is better with the right group, but if you know gaming, you will know that there are certain groups, after you become familiar with the rules of Game of Crowns, with which this game will work particularly well. It takes a group that is willing to explore the subtleties and the complexities of the design, that is willing to exploit all of the implicit psychological factors that come into play, that is really willing to try to create those social interactions that I think are very important to make the game shine. It's a good game. I just am afraid that it may be overlooked by casual gamers, or better, casual gamers playing it may overlook all that the design has to offer. But if you're willing to explore what the design has to offer and to work devious strategies towards your objectives, and if you are in a group with other players that are in the same frame of mind, I think that this is a design that can be very successful and can indeed be a lot of fun to play.